Benito Mussolini. At his peak, Benito Mussolini ruled Italy for more than 2 decades, controlled the press, commanded the military, and styled himself as the embodiment of the Italian state. In 1943, that power collapsed from the inside. Mussolini was removed by his own government, arrested, then rescued by Nazi Germany, and installed as the puppet leader of a shrinking territory in northern Italy. By 1945, even that final remnant was falling apart as Allied forces and Italian resistance fighters closed in. Realizing the end was near, Mussolini tried to escape. Disguised and traveling with retreating German troops, he attempted to flee toward Switzerland alongside his mistress, Clara Petacci. He didn't make it far. Italian partisans recognized him near Lake Como and captured him. The next day, without a public trial or ceremony, Mussolini and Petacci were taken to a small village and executed by gunfire. What followed was symbolic. Their bodies were transported to Milan, dumped in a public square, beaten, spat on, and hung upside down from a metal beam as crowds gathered below. The man who once demanded absolute loyalty from millions ended as a public warning. Power removed, authority erased, control reversed. Saddam Hussein. At his peak, Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq through fear and control. He watched his people closely and punished anyone who opposed him, presenting himself as both the protector and the enforcer of the state. That image collapsed in 2003. After a US-led invasion, Iraq's military and government fell apart within weeks. Baghdad was taken, Saddam's statues were pulled down, and his regime disappeared almost overnight. Saddam vanished. For months, he stayed in hiding as soldiers searched the country. Wanted posters were spread and large rewards were offered for information. Then in December 2003, US troops found him hiding underground in a small concealed bunker known as a spider hole. He surrendered without a fight. Saddam was arrested, put on trial by an Iraqi court, and found guilty of crimes against humanity. He asked to be executed by firing squad, saying it better fit his role as a military leader. The request was refused. On December 30th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging. Video of the execution later appeared online, turning his final moments into a global debate. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge, a radical group that ruled Cambodia in the late 1970s. Under his rule, the country was forced into extreme changes that led to the deaths of around 1.5 to 2 million people from executions, hunger, and disease. But Pol Pot did not lose power while still ruling. In 1979, Vietnam invaded Cambodia and quickly removed the Khmer Rouge from power. Pol Pot escaped into the jungle near the border with Thailand. From there, he continued to lead a much weaker group for many years. Despite the scale of what happened under his rule, Pol Pot avoided arrest and lived under the protection of loyal followers. By the mid-1990s, the Khmer Rouge began falling apart from the inside. Fear and mistrust spread through the group. In 1997, Pol Pot ordered the killing of his longtime ally, Son Sen, along with Sen's family. This destroyed the last trust within the movement. Fearing he would be next, a top commander named Tom Mok turned against him. Pol Pot was arrested by his own people and placed under house arrest in a remote jungle camp. Old, weak, and isolated, he gave a final interview, claiming he had acted for his country and denying responsibility for the deaths. Later that year, the Khmer Rouge sentenced him to life in prison. It was not an international court, but his own organization passing judgment. Less than a year later, on April 15, 1998, Pol Pot died in his sleep. The official cause was heart failure. Others later claimed he took his own life after learning he would be handed over to international authorities. Pol Pot never faced a public trial. He died alone, guarded by former followers. Far from the cities and people, his rule had destroyed a quiet ending to one of history's darkest regimes. Mao Zedong. At his peak, Mao Zedong was more than China's leader. He was treated as untouchable, a political symbol tied directly to the state itself. But behind the image, his health was breaking down. In his final years, Mao was seriously ill. He suffered from heart and lung problems, and his condition was carefully hidden from the public. Appearances were staged to make him seem strong, even as his body weakened. By 1976, the decline could no longer be concealed. That year, Mao suffered multiple heart attacks. Each one left him weaker, until he could no longer speak or function on his own. Power quietly shifted to those around him, even though his image remained everywhere. On September 9, 1976, Mao Zedong died at the age of 82. The response was massive. More than 1 million people filed past his body. It was embalmed and placed on permanent display, despite Mao's request to be cremated. Unlike many dictators, Mao did not fall in violence or rebellion. His power faded slowly, and in death, the state turned him into a permanent symbol. The system he built survived him, and his authority didn't end. It was preserved. Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba in 1959 after leading a revolution that overthrew the Batista government. Over the next 50 years, he became one of the most well-known political leaders in the world, ruling through strict control and strong personal authority. Unlike many dictators, Castro managed to stay in power for decades. He He survived pressure from inside the country, economic sanctions, assassination attempts, and even the collapse of the Soviet Union. For years, rumors about his death spread often, only to be disproven by sudden public appearances. In 2006, Castro's health began to fail. After a serious illness, he underwent emergency surgery and handed power to his brother, Raúl Castro. For the first time since the revolution, Cuba was being run without Fidel Castro in charge. This change became permanent. In 2008, Castro officially stepped down as president because of poor health. He withdrew from public life and no longer ran the country day to day, though he sometimes shared written thoughts. On November 25, 2016, Fidel Castro died in Havana at the age of 90. The government did not reveal the cause of death. His death marked the end of an era. Some people mourned quietly, while others remained divided over his legacy. Fidel Castro did not fall through violence or revolt. He faded slowly, leaving behind a system that continued without him, and a legacy still debated long after his death. Nicolae Ceaușescu. For more than 20 years, Nicolae Ceaușescu ruled Romania with strict control. He watched the population closely, forced people into poverty, and built a system where loyalty to him was everything. By 1989, that control began to break. Protests started after security forces opened fire on civilians. What began in one place quickly spread across the entire country. Even though the media was censored, people shared the news, and the regime lost control almost overnight. Ceaușescu tried to show strength by holding a large public rally in Bucharest. It failed. Instead of cheering, the crowd turned on him. For the first time in his rule, he was booed live on television. Shocked and confused, Ceaușescu fled inside as the country erupted into open revolt. He and his wife, Elena, escaped by helicopter, but the military soon withdrew its support. The helicopter was forced to land, and within hours, both were arrested by soldiers who had once protected them. On December 25, 1989, the Ceaușescus were put on trial by a military court. The trial lasted less than an hour. They refused to accept the court's authority and claimed Nicolae was still the rightful leader. The decision was already made. Minutes later, both were executed by firing squad. The footage was shown to the public, marking the sudden and violent end of the regime. Ceaușescu's rule ended not with escape or negotiation, but with a rapid collapse abandoned by the state he built and destroyed within the same week. Joseph Stalin. At his peak, Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union with near total authority, overseeing purges, forced labor camps, and a system built on fear and loyalty tests. But in his final years, Stalin became increasingly isolated. He distrusted nearly everyone around him, including his own doctors. Some were imprisoned for suggesting he reduce his workload, while others were accused of plotting against him. Even within his inner circle, fear replaced confidence. On the night of March 1, 1953, Stalin was found collapsed on the floor of his residence, partially conscious but unable to speak. He remained untreated for hours. For days, Stalin lay dying while those around him hesitated, unsure whether acting without permission would put their own lives at risk. By the time medical help arrived, the damage was irreversible. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin died from a cerebral hemorrhage. In death, chaos followed. Massive crowds gathered to view his body, and the lack of organization led to a deadly crush that killed hundreds. Even after his death, fear and confusion remain. The man who demanded absolute control died surrounded by hesitation, silence, and uncertainty, undone not by rebellion, but by the system he built. Hideki Tojo. Hideki Tojo served as Japan's prime minister during much of World War II. He became the public face of Japan's wartime leadership as the country expanded across Asia and the Pacific. When the war ended, his role made him a clear target. After Japan surrendered in 1945, Allied forces moved quickly to arrest those responsible for leading the war. Tojo was at the top of that list. On September 11, 1945, American soldiers arrived at his home to arrest him. Tojo tried to end his own life. He shot himself in the chest, hoping to die before capture. The attempt failed. The bullet missed his heart, and American medics saved him. Tojo was then taken into custody and put on trial before an international court. During the trial, he accepted responsibility for Japan's actions during the war. He defended the war but also admitted it caused great suffering. The court found him guilty of multiple war crimes. He was sentenced to death. On December 23, 1948, Hideki Tojo was executed by hanging in Tokyo. The man who once directed Japan's war effort ended restrained, judged, and executed by the victors, a failed suicide followed by public judgment. Adolf Hitler. At his height, Adolf Hitler controlled most of Europe, commanded millions of soldiers, and ruled Germany through fear, propaganda, and absolute authority. But by early 1945, that power was collapsing on every front. Allied forces were advancing from the west. The Soviet Red Army was closing in from the east. German cities were in ruins, and Hitler's inner circle was either disobeying orders, fleeing, or quietly preparing for surrender. Still, Hitler refused to accept defeat. He retreated underground into the Führer bunker beneath Berlin, issuing commands to armies that no longer existed, and clinging to increasingly unrealistic hopes of a last-minute reversal. As Soviet troops surrounded the city, his isolation became total. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a brief ceremony inside the bunker. The next day, with Soviet forces less than a mile away, Hitler chose to end his life. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself, while Eva Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were carried outside, doused in gasoline, and burned according to his instructions, as artillery shells fell nearby. Germany surrendered days later. The man who built his identity around domination and permanence left behind no empire, only ashes, ruins, and silence.